I let a homeless little girl sing for food at the end of my shift, thinking it would be just an act of kindness. But when the restaurant owner arrived, everything spiraled out of control. I had no idea that this decision would change my life and hers in a way no one could have predicted. The fine rain drizzled on the roof of the restaurant as I wrapped up another shift. Fatigue weighed heavily on my shoulders, and the clock on the wall seemed frozen. Only 2 customers remained in the dining area, and I was already dreaming of the moment I could take off my apron and head home. That's when I saw her. She stood outside on the street in front of the restaurant, her bare feet on the wet ground. Her disheveled hair clung to her face in the dampness, but what struck me most were her eyes. Large and full of fear, they wandered over the restaurant's facade, as if the entrance was an insurmountable barrier. At first, I hesitated. It wasn't uncommon to see people in difficult situations in that area, but something about her was different. Perhaps it was the fragility she exuded, or the way she seemed to be teetering on the edge between asking for help and disappearing into the night. I stepped out of the restaurant and approached her slowly. "Are you hungry?" I asked. She didn't respond, but the way her eyes locked onto mine was clearer than any words. I went back to the kitchen and made a simple plate of food. When I brought it to her, I thought about how I could ease her hesitation. Without thinking too much, I said, "If you want, you can sing a song for the customers. I promise they'll like it." She looked at me with suspicion, but accepted the plate. We walked into the restaurant together, and the dining area, which had been dominated by the muted sounds of cutlery, suddenly felt charged with expectation. At first, her voice was almost inaudible, timid and hesitant. But as she sang, something shifted within her. It was as if she was awakening. Her voice, sweet and powerful, filled every corner of the room. The customers, who had previously been indifferent, stopped to listen. Even the cook appeared at the kitchen door, drying her hands on her apron to enjoy the moment. When Emma finished, there was a silence that lasted only a few seconds before it was broken by applause. Her face flushed, and a small, shy smile appeared. But before she could say anything, Robert walked into the dining area. He had the stern look we all knew too well. "What's going on here?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the magical atmosphere that had formed. As soon as he saw Emma, he furrowed his brow. "Who is she? And why is she in here?" I explained what had happened, but Robert shook his head, furious. "This isn't a place for charity, let alone for beggars. I want her out of here, now." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I looked at Emma, who was already getting up to leave, and something inside me broke. "If she goes, I go too," I declared. I dropped my apron on the nearest table and extended my hand to Emma. We left together that night without a plan, but with the certainty that something greater had begun. The door of the restaurant slammed behind us, muffling the last sounds of a place I had called work just minutes before. The rain had stopped, but the night's chill felt more intense now that we were outside. I looked at Emma, who held the empty plate against her chest, as if it were a shield. "Do you have somewhere to go?" The question came out more like a whisper, hesitant, because deep down I already knew the answer. She shook her head, her big, scared eyes locked onto mine. My heart ached. I had no idea how to care for a child, especially in a situation like this. But the thought of leaving her alone was unbearable. So with the little money I had, I bought 2 loaves of bread and a hot tea at a 24-hour bakery. We found shelter on a park bench, where we shared my coat to protect ourselves from the biting wind. "What's your name?" I asked as she nibbled on the bread. "Emma," she replied softly. "Do you live with anyone? Parents? Siblings?" She hesitated before answering. "My mom. She disappeared. One day I woke up and she wasn't there anymore. The knot in my throat tightened. I didn't want to press her with more questions that night. I just promised that we would do our best to find her mother. The next day, my friend Mary, always practical and direct, was the first person I turned to. She listened to the story attentively, her eyes narrowing as if she were assessing every detail. "You did the right thing in getting her out of there," she said without mincing words. "But you need a plan, and fast." It was Mary who suggested I talk to Ernest, a friend of hers who owned a small restaurant across town. He was known for helping people in difficult situations and, according to her, had a heart bigger than his business. When Ernest welcomed us, I was struck by his warm presence. He was a middle-aged man with grey hair and a genuine smile that seemed to melt away any tension. I explained the situation and he immediately offered us a room in the back of the restaurant. It was small, with a narrow bed and a window that didn't close properly, but it was better than anything I could have imagined. "You can work here," he said, "and the girl can stay safe until we figure out what to do." I thanked him sincerely, feeling for the first time since the previous night that there was some hope. In the days that followed, Emma began to open up little by little. She didn't talk much about her mother or what had happened before she showed up in front of the restaurant where I worked, but there was a sparkle of curiosity in her eyes every time she saw me cooking or cleaning the dining area. One night, while I was washing dishes, Ernest heard Emma humming in the kitchen. He stopped, enchanted, and called me over with a smile on his lips. "That girl has a special talent," he said. It was he who suggested that Emma sing for the customers. At first, she was shy, but when she saw that her voice made people smile, she began to loosen up. Soon, the restaurant was busier than ever, with customers coming not only for the food, but to hear little Emma sing. But the success also brought complications. Ernest, excited about the increase in customers, started asking Emma to sing every night. I could see the fatigue in her eyes, but she never complained. Only after much insistence was I able to convince him to give her a break. "She's just a child, Ernest," I argued. "We can't treat her like an attraction." He hesitated but eventually agreed, though I knew that the profit Emma brought weighed heavily in his decision. Then, one cold afternoon, when the restaurant was quieter, everything changed again. A woman walked through the door, her eyes scanning the room with urgency. She was poorly dressed, her face marked by fatigue and time. When her eyes finally found Emma, she froze, as if she had seen a ghost. "Emma?" she called, her voice trembling. Emma stood still, her eyes filling with tears, before she whispered, "Mom." The woman rushed to her, falling to her knees to embrace her. Emma hesitated for a moment, but soon surrendered to the hug, sobbing into her shoulder. The entire hall fell silent as the two were reunited, a moment so powerful it felt like it transcended the walls of the restaurant. I stood, frozen, watching from a distance, a mix of relief and concern washing over me. Who was this woman? Why had it taken so long for her to find Emma? More importantly, what did this mean for the future we were beginning to build together? Emma's reunion with her mother, Laura, was like a ray of hope amid uncertainties. They didn't let go of each other that night. As they talked, their sobs and smiles intertwined, and I noticed how Emma seemed to transform back into a child in that moment, shedding the weight she had been carrying since I met her. Laura recounted her story in a choked voice full of regret. "I never wanted to abandon her," she explained. "We were living on the streets, and I went looking for help. But I was deceived by people who promised to get us out of that situation. When I returned, Emma had disappeared." It was hard to hear that without feeling anger at the pain both had endured, but it was also impossible not to recognize the genuine love Laura felt for her daughter. However, something in her story seemed incomplete. Her eyes darted away at times, and there was a nervousness she tried to hide. In the following weeks, Laura began spending more time at the restaurant, helping Ernest with small tasks. She was hard-working, but there was something about her behavior that kept me on edge. Her sudden absences became frequent, and whenever questioned, she offered vague excuses. One afternoon, while washing dishes in the kitchen, Ernest called me over. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious. "Laura asked me for money yesterday. She said it was to take care of Emma, but I don't know. Something doesn't feel right." Ernest's concern only reinforced my own fears. I decided to pay closer attention to Laura's movements. A few nights later, I saw something that made me even more suspicious. I was closing up the restaurant when I noticed Laura talking to a man near the corner. He looked agitated, gesturing wildly while she kept her head down. After a few minutes, she handed something to him before returning to the restaurant. When I confronted her, Laura tried to downplay it. "He's just an acquaintance," she said, but her voice trembled. "Laura, you need to be honest," I insisted. "If something's going on, we need to know." She hesitated before finally confessing. The man was a loan shark to whom she owed money. During the time she spent on the streets, Laura had accumulated debts to survive, and now the collectors were after her. "I just wanted to protect Emma," she said, her voice heavy with guilt. "They said they'd hurt us both if I didn't pay." The gravity of the situation left me reeling. Laura was trying to do what she thought was right, but her choices were putting Emma at risk again. I told Ernest and Mary everything, and together we decided it was time to take action. Ernest, ever practical, suggested we organize a fundraising event at the restaurant. The idea was to attract the community for a special night, with music and food, raising enough money to help Laura pay off her debts and start anew. Convincing Laura to participate was a challenge. She felt ashamed and guilty for relying on all of us. But in the end, she agreed, especially because Emma wanted to help her. The night of the event was magical. The restaurant was busier than it had ever been. Emma took to the makeshift stage and sang like never before, her voice carrying all the emotion of the hardships they had faced. As she sang, I looked at Laura, who sat in a corner, silently crying. It was not just the pride in seeing her daughter shine, but also the awareness of all that she had failed at and of all the second chances she was receiving. The event raised enough money to cover the debt and a little more, but something unexpected happened at the end of the night. One of the guests approached Laura, revealing himself to be a lawyer, offering help to regularize her situation. It was a small miracle amid the chaos. The following days were calm. Laura seemed lighter, and Emma was happier than ever. But I knew the peace was fragile. The pressure on Laura was still immense, and her internal struggle to feel worthy of the new life was evident. One afternoon, while Ernest and I were organizing inventory, Laura entered the kitchen with a somber look. "I need to talk to you," she said. When we sat down, she began to cry. "I know you all have done so much for me, but I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough to be the mother Emma deserves." I sat in silence for a moment before responding. "Laura, nobody is born ready. We're all learning, making mistakes, and trying again. What matters is that you're here now, trying." She nodded, but I knew there was more behind her tears. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Laura disappeared again, leaving only a letter on the table in our room. I tried, really, but I think deep down, I knew I wasn't ready for this. "I'm leaving Emma with you, because I know she'll be safe and happy. I'm going to seek help, but I need to do it alone. I hope one day you can forgive me." The feeling of emptiness was overwhelming. I had to be strong for Emma, who cried for days, feeling abandoned once more. She spent long periods looking out the window of the small room we shared at the back of the restaurant, as if waiting to see her mother return at any moment. I tried to keep her mind occupied with small tasks in the restaurant. I taught her to fold napkins, to set up the tables before opening, and on quieter nights to cook simple dishes. Each small achievement brought a timid smile, But the void left by Laura still lingered between us. Ernest and Mary supported me, but the responsibility of caring for her felt heavier than ever. It was in that moment I realized my life had changed forever. Emma was no longer just a lost child I had helped on a rainy night. She was my family. The days that followed Laura's departure were difficult. Emma seemed disoriented, and her silence broke my heart. It was during one of those quiet nights that something unexpected happened. We were closing the restaurant when Ernest rushed in, holding an envelope. "This came for you," he said, handing it to me with a worried look. I opened the envelope and immediately recognized Laura's handwriting. The letter was short, almost desperate. I tried to start over, but things didn't go as planned. "They're after me again. I can't go back, but I need you to take care of Emma for me. I trust you." The envelope also contained an address. The city was the same, but the neighborhood was on the outskirts, a place I knew wasn't safe. I decided to go there, but I didn't tell Emma anything. I asked Mary to look after her while I investigated the situation. I arrived at the indicated address just as night fell. It was a run-down boarding house with broken windows and peeling walls. I knocked on the designated door, and a weary, middle-aged woman answered. "Are you a friend of Laura's?" she asked, and before I could respond, she opened the door wide. Inside the small room, Laura sat on the floor, her gaze lost and her face marked by exhaustion. When she saw me, she began to cry. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she said, quickly wiping her tears away. "Laura, what's going on?" I asked. "You said you were trying, that you were getting better." She shook her head in frustration. "I thought I could handle everything, but they won't leave me alone. The debt was never really paid. They always find a way to keep me trapped." That's when she revealed the extent of the problem. It wasn't just the debt. It was the influence these people had over her life, exploiting vulnerabilities and making escape almost impossible. "I need you to protect Emma," she pleaded. "If something happens to me, she can't be in danger." I promised I would look after Emma, but I couldn't just leave her in that situation. Ernest and Mary had already shown that we were not as powerless as we thought, and I decided that together we would find a solution. Back at the restaurant, Ernest listened to my story attentively. "This is more serious than I imagined," he said, crossing his arms, "but I think I know someone who can help." That's how we met Carlos, a lawyer who had dealt with similar cases before. He agreed to work with us, explaining that the best approach would be to bring the situation to light. He suggested a community event at the restaurant where Laura could safely and anonymously tell her story while he gathered evidence against the group that was exploiting her. Convincing Laura was not easy. She was terrified, but the idea that this could help others like her gave her the courage to go forward. On the night of the event, the restaurant was packed. The community came together once again, bringing support and warmth that Laura had long been missing. Emma sang a song she had practiced for days, and her voice seemed to carry all the strength they both needed. When Laura stepped onto the makeshift stage, there was absolute silence. Her voice trembled at first, but gradually the words began to flow. She told her story, exposing the cycle of debt, exploitation, and fear she had faced. The emotion in the room was palpable. Some people were crying, while others looked on with determination. At the end, Ernest stood up and promised that his restaurant would be a place of support for anyone in need. It was a moment that changed not only Laura's life, but also the lives of everyone present. The following days were transformative. Carlos managed to involve the authorities, and those responsible for exploiting Laura were finally arrested. She began working with Ernest and Mary on a community program to help other women escape similar situations. But the biggest impact was on Emma. For the first time, she seemed truly at peace. Her relationship with Laura slowly began to rebuild, but in a solid way. They started attending therapy sessions together, and every small progress was celebrated. The night when it all began still lingers in my memory. Sometimes I look at Emma, now smiling and playing as she helps in the restaurant, and I remember the barefoot, frightened girl I found in the rain. Laura still had a long way to go, but now she had something that had once seemed impossible: hope. Together we learned that even in the darkest situations, kindness, courage, and unity can create new beginnings. The restaurant was full that afternoon, but the atmosphere was no longer the same as before. Ernest had transformed the place into something greater than just a business. The restaurant had become a space of welcome, where stories of overcoming were as important as the food served. Laura was behind the counter, helping Ernest with orders. Despite the scars she carried, there was something different about her demeanor, a spark of determination, someone who finally believed that a better future was possible. Emma ran around the dining area, delivering glasses of juice to the tables with a radiant smile. Occasionally, she would stop to sing a short song, and the joy in her voice seemed to be contagious to everyone. I observed from a distance, feeling a sense of relief and pride. Life had changed for all of us. The weeks that followed the community event were transformative. Laura began officially working at the restaurant, and her presence was warmly welcomed by everyone. Ernest, who had once seemed more focused on business, became a true pillar of support for her and many others. Mary, as always, was the invisible gear that kept everything running smoothly. She led an effort to raise additional funds, ensuring that Laura and Emma had everything they needed to start over. As for me, I continued working at the restaurant, but now with a renewed purpose. Emma became part of my life in a way I never imagined. She taught me more about courage, resilience, and love than anyone else ever could. One night, as we were closing up the restaurant, Laura came over to me. "I wanted to thank you for everything," she said, her eyes shining with emotion. "You don't have to thank me," I replied. "You did your part, and you continue to do so." She smiled, but there was something more she wanted to say. "I was thinking, in a few months, maybe it's time for us to follow our own path. Me and Emma." The declaration caught me off guard, but not completely. I knew this moment would come. Laura was rebuilding herself, and part of that process was creating an independent space for her and her daughter. "If that's what you think is best, I support you," I said, though a pang of sadness crossed my chest. "You will always be a part of our lives," she assured me. The day they moved into their new home was bittersweet. The community gathered to help with the move, and Emma, with tears in her eyes, hugged me tightly before getting in the car. "I'll come back to visit," she said, clutching the teddy bear that had been with her since the beginning. "I'll be waiting," I replied, trying to hide my emotions. The following months were calm, but the restaurant never stopped being a meeting point for us. Laura and Emma came back whenever they could, and each visit was a celebration. Emma continued to sing, not just in the restaurant, but also at local events. Her voice became a symbol of hope for many, a testament that even in the most difficult situations, there is a path to the light. As for me, I kept working at the restaurant, but in a new role. Ernest, who was planning to retire soon, began preparing me to take over management. "You have the heart for this," he said with a smile. Today, when I look back, I think of that rainy night when it all began. I remember the barefoot girl, her big frightened eyes that changed my life forever. Emma and Laura weren't the only ones who found a new beginning. I was transformed too. Together, we learned that kindness can create bonds stronger than blood, that courage can change destinies, and that in the end, the greatest stories of overcoming challenges are those we share with the ones we love. The restaurant remains open, not just to serve meals, but to welcome stories, And every time Emma comes back to sing, it's as if the circle closes once again, reaffirming that even in the toughest moments, there is always a chance to start over.